Anyone that knows me knows I'm an avid HBCU supporter. I'm also an HBCU alum of the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. And I know that we're going to have some of my colleagues from my alma mater on the call as well. And this is my first big presentation from a number of the projects that I've worked on, and it's a really special one. I actually was a part of the very first cohort at my undergraduate institution for the HBCU Up program. So over the years throughout my career, I've kept up with all of the work that's being done at my alma mater, but also other HBCUs. And fast forward a few years, I now have my PhD, and I'm following in the footsteps of some of the leaders on my very campus to continue the work that they've done. And so this is a very exciting moment for me to be able to present on this project. So I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. And I believe you will really enjoy this presentation. So moving right along, just a few ground rules and reminders as we go through this presentation today. Please register at our Eventbrite link whenever you get a chance. Brittany or Jay, if one of you could drop that link into the chat, I would greatly appreciate that. We want to make sure we have everybody's information on file as we continue to do this work and work on other projects and try to spend a lot of time around meaningful partnerships and collaborations. I get emails all the time with folks who want to partner with folks at HBCUs and connect with individuals and things like that. So we like to keep everyone's information on file for those type of opportunities. Please mute your microphones and keep them muted. I think we actually have it set to where you can't come off mute, but just in case, please keep those muted. Any questions that you have, just drop them in the chat, and we do have a designated section for guest Q&A. So we'll go over some of those questions during that time, depending on how much time we have left. And then also make sure you complete the survey that Brittany or Jay will send out at the end of the call. We definitely want your feedback on this because, like I said, there's a lot of great work to be done as it relates to MSIs overall, but especially HBCUs, and we want to keep in contact with everyone. So the first thing I'm going to do is introduce our team. I love the folks that we had on this project. This work wouldn't have been possible without them. I kind of introduced myself, but my name is Trina Fletcher. I'm an assistant professor at Florida International University in Engineering and Computing Education. I'm also a faculty fellow for the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. The other person I want to point out is Dr. Rochelle Williams, who's the Chief Programs Officer at the National Society of Black Engineers. And I would be remiss not to mention that Rochelle is a two-time HBCU grad, Spelman College and also Southern University. So I have to make sure I point that out. And then also, last but certainly not least, Dr. Alicia Crumpton-Young, who is the Provost and Senior Vice President at Morgan State University. And if anyone knows anything about being a provost or an administrator at an institution or an executive at a nonprofit, they have very, very busy jobs. And when I reached out to these two women to be involved with this project, they didn't even hesitate. They were on board for this very important one-year project sponsored by NSF. So ladies, I am very thankful for your commitment to this project, and I really do appreciate you both. I know y'all know that, but I just want to mention that again. And also, we had a very just phenomenal overall team. We call them HBCU Knowledge Partners, or KPs. These individuals were committed to this project. I was texting them, emailing them. They made all the phone calls, reached out to folks, and I'll talk a little bit more about what all they did here in a second. But these individuals, this project really would not have been possible without them. So Dr. Chestnut of North Carolina A&T University, Dr. Phyllis Gray Ray of FAMU, Miss Magda and Lazinska, make sure I pronounce Magda's last name correctly, of Jackson State University was with us. So my iPods don't want to stay in, okay. Dr. Reeves of Prairie View A&M University was with us. Also, Dr. Carl Reed, many of you may know Carl from NSB, but he's now the Senior Vice Provost and Chief Inclusion Officer at Northeastern University. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Francis Williams, who's the VP of Research and Sponsored Programs at Tennessee State University. Without these individuals, this project really would not have been possible. And I am so thankful for their commitment that they made, again, during a very, very difficult time for all of us at their institutions, and a lot of additional work, but they made time for this project. So thank you all. And you'll hear more from our KPs later on. And last, but certainly not least, our two researchers that work directly with me day in and day out on this project. Ms. Brittany Boyd, who just defended her dissertation at Morgan State University. So she'll be Dr. Boyd here very, very soon when she finishes those edits. And then Dr. Jay Jefferson, who was a Worlds Ahead grad at FIU, who came back to FIU to be a postdoc in my research lab and to work with our group. And he's been phenomenal. Brittany's been phenomenal. And work couldn't have happened without them. So I'm very thankful for their contributions to this project. So that was our team. Those were the folks that were involved in this project in and out. I think you saw from their titles, from their positions, we were not playing around, right? We had a very solid team to make sure this project was done right and done well. And definitely want to make sure I point them out. So before we get to rolling into the actual data and the depths of the project, I want to hand it over to EK. She's our Senior Vice President of HR and also the Vice Provost of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at FIU. EK is absolutely amazing. I'm very proud to be able to call her a mentor and friend. And she just wanted to give a couple of comments before we presented the results of the project. I'm gonna hand over to you to EK.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Fletcher, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome to a presentation that I feel has the potential to really shift the trajectory of our national and global communities. And I really got to live in that place of thinking big, because if you shoot for the stars, you're going to hit maybe the moon and you'll be still up there, right? So I do want to bring you greetings on behalf of our president, Dr. Mark B. Rosenberg, and our FIU community that's nestled in South Florida. I heard, I think Dr. Young said she's up there in Baltimore somewhere where I'm sure it's cold. So right here in South Florida, we welcome you virtually. And as an HSI, our positioning is really unique and full of opportunity for this collaboration. And when I think about the wake of last year's social justice arousal and the convergence of COVID and even our current state of civil unrest, to me, it stands to reason that presentations like this, like today's discussion, have really appropriately risen to the top of our agendas, and higher ed really does move us to a better place of what I call sustainable transformation that we can experience through our students who one day become our graduates, who one day become our researchers, who one day become our faculty, among other incredible careers throughout the globe. And so that's how I think about this great work that you all are doing, and you're going to see the results from today. So that's what we're doing in higher ed. And I really want to thank each of you for joining us today, all of you that have worked so tirelessly with Trina and bringing us to this point. I do want to say that I am a proud graduate of the College of Love and Charity, Dr. Gray Ray, that sits on the highest of 7 hills in Tallahassee, Florida, double alum there, bachelor's and master's there. And I personally know how important this work is that you're doing for our students across the nation. So I applaud you. I appreciate each of you. And I want you to know that you can reach out to me for anything that we can do on our end for students here and where you are. So thank you so much, Trina.
Thank you so much, EK. We appreciate that. And thank you for taking our time to join us and sharing those words. So moving right along, I'm going to hand it over to Provost Licia Crumpton-Young of Morgan State University. And Licia was our lead consultant on this project, if you didn't catch that earlier. And she's going to go over the importance of today's webinar.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fletcher. And I too want to join with everyone in thanking Dr. Fletcher for her leadership. I also want to thank Dr. Boyd. I will go ahead and use that very proudly because I'm the provost and I will bestow that degree upon her. And so I'm looking forward to it. And then I want to thank Dr. Jefferson as well. They have been a team of individuals that have worked with what I call purpose and passion in getting this project completed at NSF. At one time, I was an NSF program officer, so I feel very confident in saying that NSF got far more than what they paid for on this project. It was really well done, and I just want to say congratulations to the team. And then I also want to thank these knowledge partners and thank the National Society of Black Engineers, because often we talk about collaboration, we talk about collective impact, but we don't always have an opportunity to see it, nor have an opportunity to realize the outcomes that will come as a result of such. And so this project to me is a prime example of that as well. And I hope that NSF and our program officers, I certainly see some of them on the call, I hope that you will use this as a project to highlight the essence of collective impact, because that's what has occurred here. Now, I will tell you, as I quickly talk about the importance of today's seminar, I've talked about the importance of the team, I've talked about the importance of collective impact, but I also want to just talk about the importance of the work. In 2019, I remember there was an article published in the Chronicle of Higher Education, and the title on that article said, "It's time to disrupt higher education." And we all knew as administrators that, wow, that meant that we needed to do some things differently in our institutions. But little did we know that that disruption would come from the pandemic. And this project was specifically put together in response to that. So I'll say the importance of today's webinar is really to discuss, and I'm thankful that our president talks about being on the west side of COVID. I am thankful that we're closer to the west side. And so I'm happy to say that we will look at this project, we'll talk about the results, but it is important to note that we as HBCUs, I feel like by and large, we were innovative and transformative despite the disruption of the pandemic. And that's what the data will show, that we continue to persist. You'll see that I have on my slide the quote that I actually cite. I'm a scholar, I love to cite their literature. And it says, "That which doesn't destroy you makes you stronger." And that is actually, the author of that quote is my grandmother. Because I think that what we found from this project, what we've learned collectively, is that our HBCUs were positioned to weather the storm, and innovation and transformation has continued to occur, and I'm thankful for that. I think you'll also hear today a good data-driven discussion about the disruption that was caused by the pandemic. And I am also someone on my campus that always points to the importance of data and the importance of data to inform decision making. But in this case, the importance of data to categorize the impact of the pandemic. And so you will hear that as well. And that's one of the things that's very important that we'll cover in today's webinar. And then lastly, I think it's so important that you will hear and you'll have an opportunity to learn, to share in the lessons that we learned during the period of the pandemic. Because one of the things that we know when we talk about leadership styles, I always say we have to listen, we have to learn so that we can then lead. And so this project, through its various survey mechanisms, provided information for us to listen and to learn from, and therefore it will also help us as we continue to lead at our HBCUs, but also the lessons that we've learned, I think, will be helpful to other MSIs, but also to higher education at large. And so that's why I am very excited about today's webinar, and that's why I am happy that many of you have joined us in today's webinar. Dr. Fletcher.
Thank you so much, Provost Crumpton-Young, very eloquently stated. And as I go into the next slide and go over the agenda, I just want to say one more time, thank you to all of our HBCU knowledge partners and our core leadership team and researchers that were committed to this project, because the areas that Provost Crumpton-Young just talked about were really at the heart of this research, and we kept those things in mind throughout the project as well, many of them. So thank you all again. And just to go over the agenda, we're going to give you an overview of the project, kind of a little bit of background information, especially if this is something that you would be interested in doing in the future or something similar to it. Key findings, We'll have a faculty reflection from Dr. Reeves from Prairie View A&M University. We'll then have a few questions that were actually posed within some of the registration forms for this event. So we'll go through those and allow our HBCU KPs to talk about that. And then we'll have a guest Q&A. So the questions that you'll drop into the chat, we'll pick some of those out and have some of our KPs answer those. And then Provost Crumpton Young will have some closing points, and then we will share the survey with you all to fill out for us so that we can get some feedback on today's webinar. So jumping right in, as I briefly mentioned earlier, this was an NSF funded project, and our program officer is actually on the call with us. So Dana, thank you so much for joining. And so when the pandemic hit, NSF reached out and said, look, we want to capture from all angles how this pandemic is impacting different groups, individuals, and populations. And so it was a great opportunity for us to really pull a group of stakeholders together to make sure we had a well-rounded group of individuals to really answer this research question of how has COVID-19 impacted the success and persistence of engineering students, faculty, and staff at historically Black colleges and universities. And so, not to go off too much, but I think anyone that has worked at an HBCU, if you're an HBCU alum like myself, or you're an HBCU ally, or you have family that went to HBCUs, you know that it is truly a family and in a community, and a sense of belonging is very important and present at HBCU. So that's one of the reasons why we didn't just look at students, we didn't just look at faculty or staff. We made sure we looked at all three populations, because all three play a critical role to the success of HBCU. So I wanted to point that out. So go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and get into the methodology, so you can have a sense of what we did and what we collected. So the first thing that we did was we created a survey, and for the students, we had 31 questions on the survey, and we really were looking at what were their experiences with adapting to the virtual learning and off-campus life during the pandemic. I think many of us have heard stories around some of the challenges students of all backgrounds, students attending all types of institutions, had with this abrupt transition to not being on campus and maybe trying to, learn remotely. So we looked at that for the students. For the faculty, we wanted to really hone in on what were their perceptions of remote instruction, as well as their overall experience with the disruption of teaching in this non-traditional setting of, virtual teaching, especially if they had not taught online already. And then for the staff, we really wanted to look at their perceived experiences and challenges with the abrupt switch to telework, and their perceived outlook on the future of their institution. Based on some research we had done, we wanted to ask some questions in that space as well. And so overall, each survey took about 10 to 15 minutes. We had the Likert scale questions from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And we did have 1 to 2 open-ended questions for each of the survey populations. So overall, we had 288 responses from 32 HBCUs. And so most folks, I think, on this call know there's a little over 100 HBCUs in the United States. And so we got a nice representation from the institutions. Now I'm going to go into the actual demographics to give you an idea of who responded to the survey, what were their backgrounds, and also give you an idea of what we actually asked from a demographic standpoint. So with the students, we actually had 171 HBCU students that completed the survey from 18 institutions. You'll see that we had a pretty even split from the primary gender identities that we know of between female and male. And then from a race and ethnicity standpoint, we had a little over 87% of our students identified as African-American and Black, and we had some other populations in there too. So that was our race and ethnicity and gender identity for students. And then as it relates to their placement in college and their majors, you see we had a nice variety of students that completed the survey as far as where they are in school. And our research team was actually very happy to see that we also had some graduate students that completed the survey, and we had some interesting results found in that space as well. And then also you look at the majors, and this was primarily an engineering focused grant and engineering focused project, but we know that you have students that do 2+3 programs, we have students that may change their major. So we did want to broaden out to STEM, and then STEM STEM more broadly. And then we had some students that were non-STEM that filled out the survey as well and provided some fruitful information that we were able to analyze and share within some publications as well. And then I'm going to hop over into our faculty. So with our faculty, we had more women, almost close to 60% that completed the survey, and then about 38% for our male faculty. And then from a race and ethnicity standpoint, we had a lower percentage as it relates to African-American and Black for our faculty. But overall, it was a very diverse population for our faculty, which provided some fruitful results as well. But you can see the different demographics there for faculty. And then moving along to their positions at their institutions and what departments they were in. Even just looking at the pie graph, you can see there's a nice, healthy variety, especially with the positions. So we know that different faculty members in different positions have different experiences. So it was nice to see an even balance across those roles from adjuncts all the way up to full professors. And then with the departments, again, this was an engineering focused grant, but you'll see we actually had more non-engineering STEM faculty that completed the survey than engineering, but it provided for some good results. So we were happy to have that diverse population. And then with staff, and we all know how important staff are to the success and the goals and achieving the goals and objectives at our historically Black college university. So it was nice to get 30 staff members from 10 different institutions that completed the survey. And you see that from a gender identity standpoint, 70% of the staff were female. And then with the departments, again, we saw this non-engineering STEM that had a heavy load, but we also already had our engineering faculty and then some non-STEM. And then when it came to race and ethnicity, we saw, again, kind of this high percentage of African-American and Blacks, similar to our student population. So just wanted to share the demographic data with you all. We also have a file that we'll be sharing with everyone that attended. That's like a 2-pager that provides all of this information just in case you want to have it for your records. So with that being noted, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Rochelle Williams, who will go through the key findings from the survey.
Greetings, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you all sharing some findings from this survey. I will spend the next few moments just going through key data that's related in general to specifically engineering students who responded, staff, and faculty. And we're going to do so in the following categories. So first, we'll look at the abrupt transitions, which impacted the students, faculty, and staff. And then the experience with the virtual environment, specifically remote work for faculty and staff and remote learning for students. I will then wrap up by focusing on findings associated with the impact of well-being and institutional support and trust. I invite you to leave questions in the chat. And during the next portion, well, the portion with the KPs in the panel discussion, we'll start to answer some of those questions if they aren't answered throughout the presentation in the chat. So let's go ahead and get started. So our questions around abrupt transitions centered on understanding experiences when moving from in-person to online engagement. Here we found that 53% of faculty indicated that remote working has made their interactions with coworkers less efficient and productive. And 60% of staff indicated that transitioning to working at home has improved their technological skills and enhanced their task management techniques. A notable key finding as it relates to our engineering students along the lines of abrupt transitions was that 56% indicated that abrupt changes to their employment status negatively impacted their academic engagement. Next slide, please. Now let's shift to understanding our respondents' experiences with remote engagement. For faculty, we see that 53% indicated that remote working made supporting research students more challenging. 60% indicated difficulty committing to professional and or student organizational services while off campus. 73% indicated that transitioning to online courses has improved their technological skills and enhanced their course facilitation techniques. And 90% felt equipped with the skills to facilitate lectures online. For students, when we look at the engineering students specifically who responded to the survey, 67% reported that not being on campus had a negative impact on their ability to complete assignments. And 70% reported that not being on campus limited opportunities to complete their course lab requirements or participate in research. When it comes to the teaching and learning aspect, 80% of the engineering students surveyed reported that instructors effectively communicated their updated expectations for completing their online requirements. However, 82% of those engineering students reported that facilitation of online classes hindered their ability to effectively learn material. Now let's look at the staff responses. For staff, we see that 95% reported that they had all of the equipment and supplies needed to support their transition to remote work, that the instructional tools were available to aid in their transition, and that they felt equipped with the skills necessary to complete their work at home successfully. And 100% of the staff reported that their supervisor had been accommodating during the transition to remote work. So this switch to in-person to virtual from in-person really begs to question, how has this impacted success for HBCU faculty, staff, and students? For staff, we see that only 20% reported a negative impact on their ability to complete daily tasks. 39% of faculty indicated that being away from campus did impact their success as an employee, specifically around tenure track evaluation and performance reviews. And 68% of the engineering students that responded to the survey indicated that being away from support staff and advisors negatively affected their academic success. We also asked respondents to report how the transition to virtual impacted their overall well-being. 25 and 58% of the faculty and staff, respectively, indicated that the transition to remote working increased their overall levels of stress and anxiety, whereas 85% of the engineering students who responded reported an increase in stress and anxiety. So let's look at this a little deeper for the students. 59% of the engineering students reported being off campus has negatively affected their sense of belonging. 69% of them stated that they have taken on more family responsibilities, and 85% reported that someone close to them or they themselves had been impacted by COVID-19. So let's just sit with that for a moment, right? When looking at the responses around institutional support and trust, we found that 74% of the faculty indicated that university leaders were sharing information in a timely manner. 75% of staff indicated that their HBCU leadership had made them feel supported during the pandemic, and 81% of students indicated their institution is prepared for COVID-19 if had it continued in the fall. And this was specifically related to fall 2020. So some conclusions on the findings per stakeholder group. So first, let's look at faculty. 4 in 10 experienced a negative impact on job success, including 58% indicating that working remotely has interfered with their ability to conduct research. Faculty also expressed difficulties in supporting research and teaching assistants, as well as providing support for student services and programs. For staff, as you heard, their responses tended towards positive outcomes regarding experiences with remote working during the pandemic. However, 25% of the staff indicated a concern about the security of their positions given the recent institutional changes. Finally, we found that for the engineering students, they indicated challenges with academic engagement, including meeting course and program requirements, as well as participating in research opportunities during COVID-19. Overall, 79% indicated that not being able to access faculty in person has affected their academic performance. So as we think about how these findings provide us with a pathway for moving forward, we just really conclude that the impact of COVID-19 and the transition to remote working and learning have highlighted how in-person experiences are important to HBCU faculty, students, and staff. I know this has been a great deal of numbers we've thrown out at you, so I'm going to ask that you continue to put your questions in the chat. And once we get to our panel session with the knowledge partners, we'll begin to answer those questions in real time. Thank you.
Excellent job, Rochelle. Thank you so much. And you know, this slide right here and what you just shared is what we have found in the literature leading up to even developing the proposal for this conversation around a sense of belonging that is provided at HBCUs that we now know was further emphasized from the results that we found. So thank you for going over that. So we are doing very good on time. I'm excited about that. So now we're going to go ahead and keep moving forward, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Reeves. And Dr. Reeves is a colleague down at Purdue A&M University doing some amazing work with the students there in the College of Engineering, particularly in chemical engineering. And so Dr. Reeves, throughout our conversations and meetings, just shared some amazing insight on her experiences at the time, right during the middle of pandemic, of working with the students and trying to navigate through everything. So I asked her to answer this guiding question for us. And Sheena, please feel free to add anything else you would like to add. But going back to that last statistic that Rochelle shared, with the 79% of students indicated that not being able to access faculty in person has affected their academic performance, I wanted to ask you in particular, as an engineering faculty at Prairie View, how do you believe COVID-19 has affected your ability to support students? You could also talk about research, but most importantly, support students and maybe your fellow colleagues. But then also, how important is it now, because we're talking about, you know, a year later, things are changing, we're headed back to campus. How important is it to be back on campus and have direct access to your students?
Thank you, Dr. Fletcher. And I also want to say the same thing that previous individuals have stated. This has been a wonderful opportunity for several universities and entities to come together and address this important issue. To answer that question, I'm actually glad for that transition, because it's perfect for an example I have from just this week, or actually last week. So last week I had my freshman class to come in and give presentations. It was the very first time we came to campus this semester. Normally when I teach my classes, it looks kind of like what our Zoom looks like now. You see black boxes with white names in it. So it's very hard as a teacher for me to be effective if I really cannot see the facial expressions for my students. So I'm able to read off my students and teach them in a better manner. But as I just said, if all I see are boxes with white names, how can I effectively determine if they understand a particular subject? So I think that's one of the things that are not beneficial to students at HBCUs, because we're used to interacting with them. We can tell when they don't understand a particular topic. So as I said, I had my students, my freshman class, to come to campus, and I really had an interactive personally with them the entire semester. However, after giving their presentations and discussing the presentations with them, I tried to leave after that point, but I ended up leaving 2 hours later because the students really craved that interaction with their instructor. So yes, they asked me questions about the class, about the major, what I thought about the future, what I thought about the winter storm that we had, what I thought about the cyber attack that we had also for our school. So they really wanted that time to just spend with their professor to pick, just to pick my brain about life, about classes, about what they should do in the future, what classes should they take during the summer. I'm also the freshman advisor, so that was a very accurate question for them to ask me. But the students really crave that interaction. And for us to make sure that our students succeed, we want to be there for them. So of course, during the course of this last year, we lost some students who didn't re-enroll into the university, or they didn't pass their classes, so they decided not to come back. Normally, we're very effective with keeping those students on track if we're able to actually grab a hold of them and interact with them. A colleague that we have here at Prairie A&M named Dr. Kelvin Kirby, who's in our electrical engineering department, usually teaches our freshman introduction class. And we normally know that he will always keep those students on track, even the ones who don't show up. He will be on them, making sure that they're there, making sure, asking them, why aren't you in class? Why haven't you turned in this assignment? You better have a good reason for not turning in an assignment. Why do you have that baseball cap on in my class? So those are certain things that the students are able to get in person, but we're not really able to do that in an online class, other than probably requiring them to turn on their cameras. But if we have them turn on their cameras, as some of you may know, there's issues with internet bandwidth. So turning on the camera, they may not be able to keep up with the speed of the broadcast from Zoom. So having their cameras off is actually a good thing. So once again, the online format may be good for certain classes, but as it pertains to engineering and having those one-on-one conversations or in-person conversations, I really think that there is value at HBCUs for having those in-person interactions and building up our students with their soft skills, with their technical skills, with any of their professional development. I think it's just more important for us to have those in-person interactions with our students.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reeves, for sharing that with us, especially the case from just this week, right? Because we know we've been working on this project a little over a year now, but we're still, feeling the remnants of this pandemic. So thank you so much for sharing that. Moving right along, we have some questions. You may remember me mentioning this earlier. We have some questions that were brought up in the Eventbrite registration form. And so we wanted to go ahead and populate a few questions from those forms. And as a reminder, based on the data that you saw that Dr. Williams presented or anything that's been shared thus far, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat. But we do have some 3 questions that we've already set up. And I'm going to ask my KPs to just hop in and answer these questions as they see fit. So the first question is actually around mental health and wellness. And this seems to be a conversation and topic that has been coming up nationally. And it obviously populated up in our results, as we mentioned earlier, and also just a topic that's I know has been floating around on multiple different campuses. Even at the NSB National Convention, we had an absolutely amazing speaker that Dr. Williams brought on, who talked about the role of mental health and wellness for faculty members and folks just taking care of themselves. So the first question that I have for our HBCU KPs is mental health and wellness has some unique findings within our study. How has COVID-19 affected students' mental health and well-being on your campuses? And the individuals that I have for this were Magda, Phyllis, and Jacqueline. So any of you feel free to jump in and just share your thoughts around this topic.
Okay, good afternoon. This is Phyllis Gray-Ray. And I'll start with this because it was a very difficult time for students, faculty and staff as well. But students had a very difficult time with switching to this. In the beginning, many of them thought, oh, this is cool. I could just lie in my bed and go to class and not have to do anything other than that. But as the semester wore on, they started experiencing all kinds of role conflict, role strain, and some of them started to be worn down with just the COVID situation itself impacting other parts of their lives that they had not thought in advance of. Many of them became depressed, they were anxious, they were paranoid. They then had to start working on real jobs or had to pick up another job in addition to being students, and weren't getting enough sleep, and were started to realize that they still were expected to perform as students would in their classes. And right before, say in the fall semester, right around Veterans Day, before we got to Thanksgiving, the students were literally burned out and did not think it was fun anymore. So that mental stress upon them really took a toll on them. And many of them were wishing to go back to classes. And it was just a very difficult time for many students.
Thank
Hi,
you so much,
this
Phyllis.
is-
Go ahead,
uh,
Jacqueline.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Dr. Phyllis Gray Ray was saying in reference to some of the things regarding students and how they felt. I had students that also were frustrated because they had to not only try to do school on the internet, but they had to help the siblings at home do school online as well. And so a lot of times that prevented them from actually working or participating in the class when they probably otherwise being at school on campus would have not had that extra responsibility. But the frustration, the depression, those things, they were real and they still are. And right now it is challenging as an advisor in the undergraduate department as well to get students to understand, okay, we're going to try to go back person in August, but some are still hesitant to register for the fall semester.
Hi, this is Magda from Jackson State. And at Jackson State, we had similar experiences with the students. They did show elevated stress and anxiety, just transitioning into the whole virtual environment and balancing their new dynamic between work and school and family life. But Jackson State has provided some resources for the students. The Counseling Center has held some virtual sessions for them. And also they have like a weekly session that they do about stress management and virtual learning to try to help the students, deal with those issues and better.
Thank you so much, Magda. I appreciate that, and Jacqueline as well. It's very important for us to hear from the folks that are on the ground how everything is impacting students. So thank you all for providing that insight. Provost, did you go ahead, Provost?
I just wanted to quickly add that we also had a similar experience, and so what we decided to do was to just act. And I know sometimes you think act, but we put in place a number of initiatives, and one of which was a mindfulness course. We allowed our students, and I thank our faculty for doing it so quickly and responding so swiftly. But we put in place a special topics course in mindfulness, and then we allowed it to satisfy the 1 hour physical activity requirement on our campus. And so we had students that enrolled, and literally they had an opportunity for their course each week to engage in some mindfulness activities that we found significantly helped their mental state of health and wellness.
Thank you so much, Provost Crumpton Young. I remember you sharing with us the work that you all were doing at Morgan State. So thank you so much for chiming in on that. Okay. And I know we actually got a question in the chat, and because it's in line with this discussion, I'm going to go ahead and ask it, and any of the HBCU KPs can go ahead and chime in with this. Michelle asked, could you speak to the stress of the faculty members who also had to balance work, family, and associated stresses? And I'm not going to talk too much because we have too many amazing KPs, but I will say I literally just added a quote to the ASEE Prism article that'll be coming out next month around this, the fact that faculty members are dealing with a lot, and it's an area that's not being discussed as much. But I'll stop there and allow any of our KPs to join in and comment on Michelle's question.
It was very, very stressful for faculty members because we were dealing with all kinds of issues all day long, all time of night. Students had issues that we had never even thought of. And we had to have more compassion than ever before. It was very, very hard, very stressful, and at times anxious for us. For example, in my course, I taught the capstone course where they have to do a senior thesis. And that's a difficult course, even face to face. And they were hoping to graduate and were just not doing very well in the class. And they stressed me around the clock. And it was very difficult to work in that environment from a faculty position.
Well, I will just add that we saw the same thing. And so what we did, once again, is try to put some strategies in place to respond to it. So we created a mindfulness course, put it during our common hour on campus so that our faculty and staff members could participate as well. And that was led by Dr. Wells, one of our outstanding professors in psychology. We also put in place something, I called it coffee and conversation with the provost. So it was an informal gathering, but it allowed the faculty members to come together to speak and to talk about some of their experiences. And we did that monthly. And then we also put in place something that we called MQ, which was the midday meditation and motivation. And that was led by one of our experts, Miss Myrick. And we offered that each week for an hour, and we recorded it for those faculty and staff members who could not attend so that they could always access that information. And we also brought a speaker in to discuss the concept of bandwidth recovery. She's an outstanding speaker. She's written a book on that, but she talked about understanding how your cognitive bandwidth is compromised when you have conditions that create stress and anxiety, and how one needs to adjust their expectations during those times when the bandwidth is being compromised. And she also talked about that with faculty members in terms of considering that for their students as well, which really helped us to put in place a practice of flexibility and structure for flexibility on timeliness of submitting assignments and those other things that we really could be flexible with to relieve some of the stress and anxiety.
Dr. Fletcher, may I interrupt and ask a follow-up to that? Thank you. Thank you so much, Provost Young. It's good to see you again.
Very good to see you.
Thank you. I am curious about the sustaining of these types of implementations. And I ask this because, and I'll just give you a personal report. So I have teenagers. They're not in the higher ed sphere yet, but it is obvious as we engage, me as a professional,
engage with their teachers and so forth, that the stresses are there and they've always been there, right? But they've been exacerbated because of the pandemic. The things will never be the same. And so there are going to be issues that we'll have to deal with ideally after this, right? So do we continue to exercise these different remedies, if you will? And maybe that's not the discussion that you're focused on now, but it is something that I am curious about. Thank you for allowing me.
Well, I will tell you, I'm also very concerned about sustainability as well, and most importantly, the effectiveness of sustainability. So I think it would be great for us to have conversations with NSF or Dr. Fletcher, because I no longer work on PI-led work, but it'd be very important to design an opportunity for us to capture some data on some of the things that we need to sustain, to your point, Dr. Clavell. What we're doing here, for example, we put in something called reading and wellness days. That had never been put in our schedule before, but that was the idea I had to help with mental health and wellness. And we're continuing those. In fact, the students have said ask the president, are we continuing them? He says, absolutely. Our mindfulness course, we're gonna continue to allow it to be in our schedule and to satisfy the university level requirement for physical education. We're going to continue our mindfulness activities. We're going to continue our midday meditation and motivation. I've gotten to the point where I enjoy the coffee and the conversation with the faculty, so we'll continue it as well. So we're going to continue as many of these, and then we're putting in place, and I will tell you this one, I'm, as provost, I'm a little nervous about, because I want it to happen, implementation to go well, but we put in place a new instructional model called high flex instruction, where ours is basically a student choice type model, where the students can decide if they're going to be in person in that class lecture or if they're going to be remote, but it will happen simultaneously. So literally, I can have a student decide on Monday that they're going to be physically in the classroom for the biology 301 lecture. And then on Wednesday, they can decide that they're going to be in the library in one of our remote pods, but fully engaged in that same course lecture, just not in the same location. And we've implemented a lot of technology, and now we're doing training for our faculty to be prepared. So my answer is, I think we've learned, to your point, Dr. Clavell, that we must continue a lot of the strategies that we put in place, because you're right. I think that stress and that anxiety has been there, but it's certainly going to continue to be there.
Thank you.
Michelle, thank you so much for that question. And Provost Crumpton-Young, thank you for chiming in and sharing in great detail what you all are doing at Morgan State. And this was actually one of the questions that was on the list. And specifically the question was, how has this forced transition to remote learning impacted administration's decisions around the future of remote and distance learning, which is exactly what Provost Crumpton-Young just talked about. And Francis, if you're on the line, I would love for you to chime in around this topic as well. And another question we had, which is directly in line, is for this fall, how has the pandemic and this transition to remote and virtual learning, how do you all see things playing out in the fall?
Sure. So which question would you like me to?
I had two different questions, right? So let's go with how has the forced transition to virtual learning and what you all have learned, right, throughout this process, how has that changed what you all will do for the fall, like offerings as Provost Crumpton-Young talked about for the students when it comes to classes?
Yes. So I'm Francis Williams. I'm at Tennessee State University. And so now that many of our faculty members have experienced teaching remotely, some for the first time, they received training for teaching online. Many have expressed an increased interest in wanting to teach online. So there have been many lessons that we've learned from teaching online during the pandemic. We've had technology or new technology that has been implemented in our classrooms to help us accommodate distance education, as well as to make our academic offerings stronger. So to that point, our administration is listening to that. Of course, we want to balance what we saw from the survey in terms of students' challenges. But I think what we're seeing is there will be an increased number of classes that are offered remotely. Again, I think with the right training and technology, it can provide a very, or a great learning environment for our students. So that's one of the things some of our professors who never had a desire to teach online are now wanting to offer more of their classes online. So of course we have to have that balance though, in terms of what's appropriate for certain programs and still offering face-to-face. So for the fall, kind of going into your second question, for the fall, we do plan to be back on campus, to be fully operational, and to have in-person classes again. And so all of our residence halls will be open for the fall, and we'll have in-person student activities. So I think we'll see a balance where you have that increase in the online offerings, but for the fall, we do plan to, so right now, most of our classes have been online for the past year. But going forward, I think there will be an increase, pre-COVID days, but we plan to go back fully operational. And our decision to resume in-person classes is in line with a reduction in the restrictions in our city. So Tennessee State is in Nashville, Tennessee. So we've, had a number of reductions recently in the restrictions, also recommendations by the CDC and state health experts. We've had a decrease in the number of cases, and we also have more people getting vaccinated. So again, for the fall, we will be going back. One thing that was also mentioned was about some of the challenges in the laboratories. And so because of restrictions, with students being on campus. And so now even that we've learned lessons from that and have put in place certain safety protocols in the labs, we expect that we'll have a reduction with those challenges, and our researchers, especially our graduate students who need to be in the lab, will be able to address that, and they'll be fully in the lab. So hopefully, I think that's questions 1 and 2.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. And I know that you actually brought up a really good point around the different states, right? And the laws based on the different states. I know we've got some folks from Meharry on the call, so I appreciate you actually bringing that up. And just knowing that, when you look at our HBCUs, especially the HBCUs that we really focused on for this project, where the KPs are from, the folks that responded as far as the engineering institutions at the HBCUs, a lot of them are in states like Florida, Texas, where we've seen in the news some of the decisions being made by leadership. So thank you for bringing that up, because that is something very important that I know administrators have to pay attention to as they're making decisions, and as you all are making decisions for the fall.
And if I could add just to that, we're things that we've learned in terms of just safety protocols, and even with our classrooms, having to reduce the class sizes and to accommodate social distancing, making sure, everyone's wearing masks. So that will be enforced in the fall. So we have to make sure, we have those safety protocols that are in place to allow us to be able to come back to campus. But that's, the students are very happy about that. We just have to do our due diligence, of course, to accommodate that and make sure our faculty, staff, and students are safe.
Absolutely. So we are doing great on time. I know we had a 4:30 end time, and if we end a little bit earlier, that's fine. So one other question that we had that has come up, and this is just it's a popular conversation in general on a national level. So I definitely wanted to pose this, and I think we have Carl. Correct? Carl is online, I believe. I sent him a message in the chat, but Carl, if you're online, I really wanted to pose this question to you. And if not, I know Provost Crumpton-Young won't mind chiming in and anyone else, but there have been some historic donations made to HBCUs in the past couple of years. I know the CEO of Netflix was one of the first that he and his wife gave a donation. And then many of us have heard about the donations that Mackenzie Scott has given out to HBCUs. And while doing my research, I noticed that pretty much every single one of the HBCUs with ABET accredited engineering programs were included on that list. So I was curious to see Carl, especially as the immediate past executive director of NSB in your work with the UNCF, would you be willing to chime in on how important, especially during this time with the pandemic, those donations are and will be to HBCUs? Okay, I'm looking at the chat. So maybe, okay. So Rochelle, if you don't mind, Rochelle, would you like to comment on that one high level? And then maybe we'll have Provost Crumpton-Young comment. Is Rochelle trying to come off mute? Can everyone hear me okay? Oh, okay, is Rochelle, did you? Oh, Rochelle, you're trying to come off mute? Or is that Carl?
I think both of them are trying to unmute themselves.
Oh, okay. So team Jay and Brittany, can y'all help me out? All right, hold on one second, Carl. Okay, I don't think Carl is here. Rochelle. So I have to unmute. Okay, I know now. Okay, give me 1 second. I don't see Carl. Rochelle, I'm not. What is going on?
I think she disappeared.
I believe
Okay.
they both jumped off the call.
Okay, so Provost Crumpton-Young, would you mind chiming in on that one until we get them back in?
Well, I will say that, you know, given all of the things happening on the national landscape with the pandemic, but then also with many of the issues associated with racial and social justice, you know, this has been a time period when HBCUs and MSIs have experienced just increased awareness of some of the inequities that we've experienced. And so I'm happy to see that many individuals are coming forward with philanthropic gifts. I mean, we've been extremely fortunate at Morgan. I mean, our gifts this year are well over $60 million, which is just historic in terms of private giving. I think what's important to understand here is that not all schools are getting an opportunity to participate in this type of giving. So I think we have to, as a community, remain cognizant of that. And we say and say to ourselves, what do we now need to do in terms of equity for some of those institutions that haven't had the opportunity to participate in that? And I think that's going to be extremely critical that we as a community pay attention to that and see what needs to be done there, because otherwise you will sort of begin to create even a difference among the schools in terms of the haves and the have-nots, which I think can lead to some long-term disparities.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Provost. And I know we have Rochelle back, and Rochelle, I've made you a co-host. So I'll allow you to go ahead and chime in, and then we'll go to Dr. Manu Platt has a question, and we'll allow him to ask his question.
Okay, thanks for that. I got frozen for a moment. I think for NSBE, what we also were able to receive some donations, substantial donations from other companies, founders, philanthropists, etc. But the question that always remains in my mind is, how is this sustainable? Why did it take seeing a Black man die on your TV to really want you to support Black people, Black students in engineering? Because the donations for us were a lot in those areas. Our COVID specific donations, we were able to get out to students very early on, but it also just goes back to that desire. How do we create long lasting, sustainable relationships with external companies and organizations so that we see change, and it's not change that's just coming when pandemics come into play? So for us, it's just that desire to continue to build on these relationships so that our students and our members can continue to receive the benefit of us being able to support programming year round and not worry about the financial piece of it.
Absolutely, Rochelle, and thank you for bringing up the murder of George Floyd, because I don't know if you caught what Provost Crumpton Young mentioned, but she kind of alluded to that social injustice piece as well, right? And so I'm glad you brought that up, as far as it shouldn't have taken what we're labeling as a dual pandemic for us to see some of these donations, which I think is a larger conversation. But thank you both for bringing that up. And so what I'm going to do now is I want to give Dr. Manu Platt, who I'm going to mention, he's a Morehouse grad, because he may not mention it, but Manu, I made you a co-host. Do you want to come off? Do you want to come off mute and go ahead and ask your question?
Us Morehouse men love to speak. Hello, everyone. Thank you for putting together this research. I love to see these friendly faces here too. But I had a question. I was really kind of thrown by Rochelle's stat that 85% of the students had either lost someone to COVID, or they were, or know someone who was impacted by COVID. And, these conversations on the national scene are coming up about how do we help people deal with grief from this time. And, I know it really impacted Black community. And I know at HBCUs, the professors care a lot more about the students. I'm just curious, what plans do you have in place to help students manage their grief, particularly when they leave their homes where they were with their families and lost someone and then come back to campus? I'm just curious if you have any strategies in mind.
Well, I'll start, and then I'll let my knowledge partners add. I will say that we are extremely concerned about it. And so the president has put together a acculturation committee. And one of the first things they're going to do is to host a ceremony, if you will, that gives everyone the opportunity to grieve and sort of put what has happened sort of behind us if we can. And so we're going to start the school year with that type of activity. We have a wonderful sociologist who's helping to, an anthropologist, she would kill me for saying that, an anthropologist who is helping to plan that event. And it'll be a university-wide event. And I think she's even planning to invite some community members. We also have increased our counseling staff. I mean, that's one of the areas sometimes at our, HBCUs that may be a little underfunded or just may not be the mainstream area where we place funding. But we've increased our counseling staff. We have added the opportunity for our students to have access to counseling. And we're doing a campaign to encourage them to take advantage of the counseling. As you all know, that is something that sometimes within our community, we're not encouraged to seek that type of assistance. And so we're doing that with our students. So those are a couple of things that we're doing to make sure that we have in place the resources for our students to deal with the grief and the anxiety that it may be lingering from the pandemic.
Did anyone else, any of our other KPs wanted to chime in on that? Everybody's good? All right. And that is actually the last of the questions that we had from the registration forms. And did we, Jay or Brittany, did we have any other questions in the chat?
Hi, Trina. I wanted to unmute, but I had to get to a safe place, where I could chime in. But I did want to share that some of the things that we were doing, such as what Dr. Young indicated, Provost Young, excuse me, is the mental health days that we had throughout the months going forward. Some of the other things that we did was we sent out gifts, little gifts. It wasn't much, little keychain and a thumb drive so that they could save their data on there, to kind of give them an incentive, because the students really did get down and they were very discouraged about learning. I got feedback from some of them saying, well, you know what? All we having to do now is teach ourselves. And they felt like that wasn't right. Why should we even have to teach ourselves? So that became an issue. But I think some of that was related to the availability of instructors making themselves available to the students when they needed them. So, the 1 or 2 hours here or there was not enough. Another thing I wanted to point out as a result of what I've been hearing is that we're going back in person. But one of the things that we did when COVID first started and we had to go remote was to develop the core courses as online courses. So moving forward, some of the core courses that were impacted greatly by this event will stay remote, and there will be some in-class courses there. So using a company, Symbiosis, we professionally developed those classes purposely for moving forward. So some courses in the fall will still be remote, and the others will be in person. But there is a committee that is trying to establish, okay, which courses have to be person to person in order to increase participation and to help the students learn. Because some of them were saying, we just can't learn online. I just can't learn online. And so that is one of the other things that we are doing on that end. So we're looking at it too. And where we had cut out spring break and fall break last year, we anticipated putting those back in there. And I don't know if we're going to keep our wellness days in addition to those or not. I think it would be nice. It would be helpful because even as a faculty member, it was very, very stressful um, myself, unfortunately for me, and that's not unfortunately, I shouldn't say it that way. But in February, my mother had 2 mini strokes. And so my world was turned upside down trying to deal with COVID, my classes, and take care of her. And it took me a little while to find my way back. But, it impacted the students as well, because sometimes, I was like, okay, I got to, counsel class to do this, to do that. But I was happy when we started having the wellness day. I also wanted to mention that part of the mental health piece is now that they have a weekly webinar for the students to join in and discuss any topics or anything that they need to assist with their, any discussions that they need to cover. And I just wanted to share that that's some of the things that we're doing in the College of Engineering at NCNT.
If I can just add one thing briefly in terms of enhancing the access for our students to our counseling services. So we introduced the telehealth counseling services. So our students, many who were, since they were taking online classes, did not return to Nashville and were across the country. They were still able to access our counseling services through the telehealth counseling services. And so that was a new service provided.
Trina, one more thing.
Go ahead.
One more thing I wanted to add in contribution to the research that was done. One of the things that we found out early on that we had to implement was computers. We had to get computers in place that we could loan to the students who didn't have computers and didn't have access to computers, as well as we had to lend out hotspots somewhere for them to connect to the internet because they either didn't have it at home or they didn't have a place that they could go to access the internet as well. So those were a couple of the other things that we had to implement in order to assist some of our students as well. And I just wanted to share that.
Jacqueline and Francis, thank you so much for chiming in on those very important topics. Telehealth, access to the actual hardware. We know that those are very, very important aspects that we don't always think about at surface level. I think going back to the telehealth piece in particular, I know I've got some colleagues on the call. I want to give just a couple of shout outs to Rashida Lewis. She and I have been looking at the mental health side of all of this. So I know that they're really listening in and listening very closely to what you all have shared. So that is really appreciated. Brooke Coley as well. I know Brooke's on the call. So thank you for providing that insight. So it's 4:17. What I want to do right now is make sure I open it up really quick to my KPs before we close out. If any of our KPs have final comments they would like to make, please go ahead and do that now before I hand it over to Provost Crumpton Young to close us out.
I guess I can start us off. I believe the last year has taught us, of course, how valuable HBCUs are to our students and the atmosphere that we have at our HBCUs in building their character and building them into the adults that we want to see in society. I think initially when everything first happened, we were so nervous. We were trying to play catch up. We didn't have the equipment, the technology and things that we needed. But now that we do have those things, I think it's definitely a better experience for us. One of the questions that was actually in the chat was about how classes were going to be offered this fall and whether engineering classes will be online. There are certain engineering classes which of course should never be taught online, but of course we had to make do with what we had this past year. And then there are others like I'm going to teach an engineering ethics class this fall where I don't necessarily think that a face-to-face setting is needed to teach things like ethics, or if we go out of STEM to history. Having 200 students in a class taking history, of course, is something we cannot do because of social distancing. So I think one of the biggest advantages that we have now is that social distancing is going to require the class sizes to be smaller. And one thing that we pride ourselves on at Prairie View is that our student to teacher ratio is very small. It was increasing over the last few years, but right now it's going to, of course, go back down because of social distancing requirements. So I think that's one of the biggest advantages. And also some of the remote learning opportunities is also going to be advantageous to our students because maybe now they do have to stay home and help take care of a parent, but we don't want them to stop their education. So having that option of them in the future to take some of these classes online instead of just dropping out and giving up is also very important. So I just wanted to leave those comments about what we discussed today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reeves. Very well stated. Anyone else? All right.
I just want to say that the opportunity to participate in this research was awesome. I enjoyed it. But not only that, it was a chance to look at the educational piece of it, but it also came in a time where, as a country and a people, we were dealing with the George Floyd things in addition to trying to keep our students motivated and challenging them to continue their education. So one of the things I shared with them when they first came to class with, the George Floyd thing was, I said, knowledge is power. If you want to help make a difference, then you need to get your education because knowledge is power. And that was something that I had to address because many of the students were sharing those feelings before class, could get started. We just had to take a minute and have that discussion. So understanding what HBCU students go through and deal with on a daily basis, this was important to help give us lessons learned and opportunities to come up with new ideas, how we can continue to support engineering in our HBCUs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for that. Again, this conversation around the dual pandemic and the role of HBCU leaders trying to manage essentially both pandemics cannot be understated. So thank you for highlighting that once again. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Provost Crumpton Young to close us out with these closing points. And before she goes, Jay Jefferson is going to, Dr. Jefferson is going to drop a link in the chat, and it is a survey that we would love for everyone who joined the call to complete, to give us some feedback on this presentation. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Provost Crumpton Young.
Well, let me thank you for that. And let me thank everyone. I just read a comment from Felina Selden in the chat, and it was the best comment. That's why I think it's important as a closing point. She says, this has been fantastic. I've been working in the mayor's office of sustainability in Cleveland, Ohio, as the outreach and education liaison since 2006, and love the exchange and incorporation of education, sustainability, mental health, etc. And I concur with her. And what I want to say, sort of in addition to what Selena said in her comment, Felina, I apologize. What Felina said in her comment is that we have emerged, not totally from the pandemic, but many people believe that we are on the west side of what I honestly want to say is the double pandemic. I believe that we've made progress in navigating the waters of both of the pandemics that we have encountered. And I think that it speaks to the resiliency of our HBCU institutions. Prior to that, we've always had conversations about relevance. Are they still relevant? Are they still needed? And we've had a number of different questions posed, and we've had answers. Of course, we're relevant. Of course, we provide outstanding student experiences, and the student satisfaction surveys have shown that nationally. But there's always been a question of, will we survive? And I think we have shown that we are resilient institutions. And so I think that's a key closing point that we all need to take away. And we need to have these coffee conversations that remind people that not only are they relevant, not only do they do a great job, not only do they supply outstanding people for our workforce, but they're resilient institutions. And then also, we have been critical to restoring our communities through this pandemic. Many of us, I know today we talked a lot about our educational pursuits, but many of us have also led the way in vaccinations and vaccination sites. Morgan, for example, is a vaccination site. We also had a campaign. I'm sure you all saw Dean Barton, our Dean of Engineering, led a video campaign where he got the deans of all the ABET accredited engineering schools to say to the students, if you want to come back, if you want things to go well, then we want to encourage you to get the vaccine. And so we led the charge to encourage our community, to restore our community. We've created a center on urban health equity because we now saw the disparities. We knew there were health disparities, but we really saw the health disparities with this pandemic. And we have rallied to say, we will be those anchor institutions to help restore our communities. And so that's critical. And I don't want anyone to miss that or minimize that. And so I brought that forward as a closing point as well. And then I think we have seen a resurgence of the importance of equity, inclusion, racial and social justice. Because I think for so long we've had conversations about diversity and inclusion. We're starting now to talk about equity, which is a very important topic. So we broaden that to maybe say diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we have yet to really talk about racial and social justice. And as Dr. Chestnut said, that her students were having questions about that. Many of our students were posing questions, but it was really that younger voice that was courageous enough to become advocates for what I call the tough conversations associated with racial and social justice. And so I think that is also a closing point of this study, the information that the study identified, and then looking at how the HBCUs have responded. I think it speaks to the fact that we have been leaders in that resurgence of thinking about race and social justice. And so I think that this has been an outstanding project, but I think the institutions have come through this remarkably. And so I will end where I started, which is the quote from my grandmother that says, "That which doesn't destroy you truly does make you stronger." And I think this study has pointed to that. And I want to thank, or at least say, I commend my colleagues at NSF, because I know when I was there as a program officer, we didn't always take the risk to fund Rapids, to fund Eagers, to fund some of those things that are highly responsive and can give us an opportunity to collect data on things in real time. Sometimes we would talk about it so long until the opportunity to respond quickly had passed by. So I just want to say to my NSF colleagues that are still with us, I commend you for being courageous enough to step forward and say, let's fund this project, and let's fund it with a young PI, and let's see if it will be successful, because I will tell you, it has been extremely successful. Thank you, Dr. Fletcher.
Thank you so much, Provost. And that was actually an excellent way to close out. I want to say thank you also to Paige Smith. I know Paige is not on the call, but Paige was one of the folks that also supported us right out the gate on this and trusted me with this work and this project. And I am very, very thankful for that. I do want to mention, I want to give Dr. Jay Jefferson a shout out, because out of this project already, we have 2 publications. We have a JEE paper. If anybody knows anything about the Journal Engineering Education, it is a very difficult journal to be published in, but we have a paper that has been, we have a revise and resubmit just in the 1 year of this project for JEE. And also Jay has had a paper accepted that is focused on Black students and mental health, because again, that was one of the biggest topics that are findings that came out of this project. So we have worked very hard on this project from a journal publication standpoint as well. And I think Brittany or Jay, you may, I don't know the exact number, but I think we've had like 3 journal conference papers that have been accepted as well. So we have worked very hard around the clock on not only doing the work, but also making sure the results are put out. And this national webinar was also a big part of that process. It was not required, but it was something we wanted to make sure we did. So again, I want to say thank you to all of my HBCU Knowledge partners and to Rochelle and to Licia. Thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate you all committing to this project, even in the midst of everything that you had going on. And thank you to everybody that joined the call. I got to give a shout out to Dr. Mortazavi. He was one of my undergraduate professors in like physical science, and he's now the vice president of research at the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff, my alma mater. So thank you so much for joining. But thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. And everyone on this call should have received an email from me with this meeting invite. So if you would like a copy of the slides and you have any other questions, if you want to get connected with some of the KPs because you want to partner with the institutions, please feel free to reach out to me and I will definitely make sure I connect you with them. So with that being said, we're going to close out right at 4:30. Thank you all for joining, and I will also share the recording if you would like a copy of that. Thanks, everyone.